Both to the audience here at Housing Mix Academy and to those of you who are in another location around the world, ideally around the world, watching online via our live stream. And also a quick thank you to Housing Mix Academy for hosting us tonight. So thank you to them. I'm sure you all know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to quickly run through some housekeeping before we all here after 2 years. But just very quickly. Please ask everyone to make sure that their phone is on silent. You're all more than welcome to take photos during the sequence event, but please, whilst you're doing so, be aware of people who are handling transport if you whilst they're transport and watch. Please do not film this event or you'll find action is recording. So I will be making this event for the last time today. Toilets, as quite a lot of you have already been told, are as soon as you go out of the toilet, right into one of them. Just to reiterate, we have been asked to use the stable toilets today. There's a couple of students that we saw hanging around, so safeguarding reasons, you stick to the stable toilets. Very grateful. If you do need to use the toilets, please make sure that you walk through those doors, 2 locked doors there. So we try to keep noise near the microphone. In case of fire, it's very unlikely that there's a fire, I should say. The alarm will sound and you'll evacuate the building properly and calmly to nothing can happen. And what we next see, as you can see, the resource here and something in the playground, which is our forest setting point. We do not have a fire to schedule this evening. Finally, if you wish to wear a mask, please feel free to do so. If any of you would like to sit in a more social distance space, as you can see, there's plenty of space in that half floor. So please feel more than welcome to do so. Okay, that's everything. So tonight's event is being hosted by Croydon Climate Action. I am Omar, and I am part of the Croydon Climate Action steering committee along with Anna, Marcus, Leonie, Colin, and Catherine. We're hosting this event in this handled with the Croydon Network, and we're very excited to introduce our chair this evening today, William Allen. William is the current UK ambassador to Commonwealth. Prior to this, William, who is another Croydonian, was chair of Croydon's in cabinet for 14 coming for his first ever young man. So I'm sure you can agree that he's an ideal person to be. If you want to share your thoughts on social media at all, please do so. Feel free to use the hashtag Croydon Climate Hustings. And that's everything. Thank you very much for everyone coming today, and please enjoy the event.
Yeah, I'm going to be hosting this Croydon Climate Crisis Hustings, and I'd like to welcome the candidates, all of you who have now committed to the Mayor's Climate Crisis Pledge. So we have Jeet, Bains, who's on behalf of Jason Kerry, and who's representing the Conservatives, Richard Howard. Okay, no worries. Okay. Jeet Bains, on behalf of Jason Kerry, the Conservatives, Richard Howard from the Dems, Farah, an independent candidate, Gavin, another independent candidate, Andrew Pelling, another independent candidate, Val Shawcross representing Labour, and Peter Underwood representing the Green Party. We are looking forward to hearing tonight how this candidate will deliver on this pledge and drive rapid and sustained reductions in carbon emissions so that Croydon is carbon neutral by 2030 at the least. The candidates will have the opportunity in their 2-minute opening remarks to set out the pathway to this carbon neutral goal, and then respond to your questions. Thank you to all of you who have submitted questions. We would love to pose them all, but time's limited, and we need to give each candidate equal airtime to respond. The questions posed in the first part of this asking, therefore, will hopefully reflect the main themes submitted in advance. The second part of the asking is a question from our live audience here and from our live stream audience. So from 6:15 to 6:30, we'll hear a 2-minute opening statement from each candidate, and then until 7:20, the candidates will have the opportunity to ask questions host like Croydon others submitted in advance. We then did this before, and I'd like to give some questions and to set this back. Finally, the candidates will have 2 minutes against their closing statements and will aim to finish the company at around 8:05. We know what the goal is, reaching carbon neutral by 2030, but the time for action is now. So let's hear from each of our candidates what they will do in the next to deliver in their time office. Now we start with the first opening statement from Underwood, and we go across the table. We have a maximum of 2 minutes. If you speak to me, I'm over here.
Yeah, please be as loud as possible because they're struggling at home.
Okay, so now we start the first opening statement and go down the order from these Underwoods down to Bains. We have a maximum of 2 minutes for a statement and answer some questions. And you hear the alarm at the end of your time. You must be very short because we need to be short in time. Now go ahead.
Thank you very much for meeting everybody, and thank you for coming. For me, politics is an interactive thing, so the fact that people are here being interactive as part of the process is vitally important. In terms of how I've set out the 3 things on now, I'll put power back in people's hands, get our council working again, and make Croydon happen, because I think politics is about making people's lives better. So they're my themes overall for the council campaign, but this debate tonight targets one of the reasons I got into politics in the first place, which is about being able to drive every possible emergency. And it is an emergency. We have to deal with it now. It's a crisis that's coming straight upon us. And we had recently the COVID crisis, we got the cost of living crisis, which is hitting us. These are all dreadful, we need to act on those. But there's no vaccine for the climate crisis. We can't spend our money out of the climate crisis. We actually need to be acting now, because when it hits, it's too late. It's already starting to impact people across the world, it's already starting to impact people in Croydon, so we need to act now. Croydon declared a climate emergency in the council back in 2019, we've done remarkably little since then, unfortunately. I've done a assessment of the Croydon Climate Crisis Commission, which I was a member of, which we worked with local people to come up with solutions, work with experts, and things that would actually start making a difference. Unfortunately, that was given to the council a year ago, and again, very little has happened with it. So we need to instill that sense of urgency and we need to get things moving. For me, tackling the climate crisis, you can't have individual choices. Actually, the crisis is about systemic change. And that's where the council needs to be involved, both in terms of changing the way the council operates and the way the council runs Croydon, but also the council acting as a lobby to central government to get central government to change. And I think Croydon needs to be taking the lead on this. We have the opportunity to set the example. We all know that Croydon's gone bankrupt, there's much money there, but if you look through the Climate Crisis Commission report, most of the costings are very well.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Val Shawcross. Good to see you this evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining in tonight. Yes, we've just wasted yet another decade when we should have been trying to tackle our climate and our environmental crisis, and there is no time to waste. And whatever other priorities we will put in our manifestos, this is a background priority, which is like breathing when you get up in the morning. We have to be making the transition towards net zero in Croydon, in the UK, in the world. So the opportunity now is not to move towards climate zero, but it's also about tackling unemployment by promoting green jobs. It's about tackling our health, and it's also about tackling our quality of life. So along with the transition to net zero, we have other things we can achieve. And it needs leadership, it needs community support, it needs technical advice. And there are things that we should be doing through Croydon Council. So let me just run through the headlines quickly. Obviously, there's energy transformation, what we can be doing on renewables to promote renewables at a local level, to be promoting insulation at a local level, calling down on grants, what we can be doing to change our waste management, reducing waste, avoiding waste, reusing, generating industries around reuse and recycling, promoting active transport, walking and cycling, most important, and lobbying for more public transport, what we can be doing to protect our natural environment, rewilding, protecting green space, tree planting, promoting biodiversity, the things we can do in our economy to promote green jobs and offering startup support and training, and the things we should be doing in climate change adaptation where we have chronic issues. So there's lots and lots we can do, and I can help manage the change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Andy Pelling, and my political career has been about putting Croydon first. I've been a Member of Parliament here, I've been an Assembly Member of the whole of the borough, and I've represented 12 wards of the 28 we have in the whole of the park. And also, actually, I don't drive, which is a good job, a good start in terms of being pretty green. Well, it's pretty hard work sometimes representing a whole borough, but I can be stuck as well when you don't drive. It is about being local, actually, and about having radical ideas. I won't be able to get through them in 2 minutes, perhaps the questions will allow me to do that. But one example of that is the Wicked Centre. The Wicked Centre is built around the idea of travelling to shopping by motorway. We need to move our retail focus towards the railway station. That is the part of town that is doing well. And if we have sustainable transport, so that people come and shop in places like that, we're going to be much greener and much more effective. Not many candidates mention the words Shibuya or Hakata in hustings like these, but they're examples in Japan as to how they've been successful in encouraging people to shop using public transport. Tokyo is a place of 35 million people. You need sustainable transport in a place like that. But one other thing I'll talk about in the 2 minutes, but there'll be so many examples like that I hope come out of the question. And I say this partly because I've lived most of my life next to main roads. And that's had a very bad effect on my health. I have pulmonary fibrosis. And we need to be strong on trying to reduce the pollution that there is on our roads, so particularly on main roads. And we need to speak out against those who are weak when they're being pushed on lower traffic neighbourhoods. It's good for people's health. It's good for people's lives. And if we promote cycling and pedestrians, we are saying we are a prosperous society that values a good quality of health and a good quality of living. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Gavin.
Yeah, my name is Gavin Palmer, and I'm an independent candidate for mayor to fix Croydon. So one of the aspects of myself is that I did mechanical engineering at university, and I got a first in life cycle engineering, life cycle costing. And one of the parts that I would bring is to make sure that you have the whole source, from the source of the energy to the conversion to the making of machines to the production of electricity, the use of it, to the disposal. All of that factored in. We're not like Norway with masses of cheap hydroelectric power. I'm also a founding signatory of the climate change resolution for the oil companies, which now has $3 trillion of backing, and have been for over 7 years. One concern I have is eco-cannibalism, where certain forms of ecological transport or ideas push out another. For instance, cycle lanes pushing out bus stops, which has been ruining Surrey Street market. Solar panels on Fairfield Halls, there should be 200. There are 10 on the roof. A Croydon Pelling Bank to enable financing. Mulberry trees for local care homes and residents for the old people to improve their health and well-being. Well-directed modern monetary theory where money is placed in the area that it's needed. Now, some of these will be trade-offs. It's nice to have cycle lanes in central Croydon. it is not nice having your bicycle stolen. And I've seen what the remains of bicycles are outside East Croydon Station. So there needs to be joined up thinking. If you're going to have people to cycle, you need to have mass cycling car parks effectively. And I've been in Amsterdam for a long time, and you can see mass numbers of cycling car parks. But it needs to be provided, otherwise cycling lanes are useless. So as one of my things, I bring sense and sensibility to the ecology and the Croydon. Thank you very much.
Just so you can hear me. So I'm not independent, actually we're taking the initiative party. Now it's Earth Day today, but truthfully every day is Earth Day. We should be celebrating this Earth every day. Now I'm going to go straight into direct policies, which I have actually gone to speak to the professors of Cambridge and Oxford, sat down to what can we do? And I've come back with great solutions. Now, have you heard of microalgae installations? Microalgae installations can be installed on buildings, and immediately, within days, they will capture the carbon dioxide, the pollution, the metals in the air, converting it to oxygen. There are solutions, but our government and the Labour Party are not using the solution. Why are we not doing anything to help our bees thrive? The population is dying, and these are things which aren't being addressed. I plan to make sure anyone that wants training on how to improve the environment, whether it's in plant sciences or with marine biology, we will teach you, so then you can go out together with your families, with your friends, and help your environment that you live in. Because we need to do this fight together. That's very important. We can change waste into energy. The Navy has been using this technology since 2010, and I plan to bring that here in Croydon so we can actually make waste into energy and give it back to the people so we can actually start reducing energy bills. Also, with the street lighting, 10 million a year is being spent on our street lights on the current grid. We can actually put solar power street lighting in, and that will actually start generating enough energy. If you put 6 together connected, that can power an electric car. And indoor farming, this was started by the Dutch model. It is now a billion euro market. I want to bring indoor farming to Croydon. It's vertical farming, it protects, you know, what we're doing with the agriculture, but what's so important with indoor farming, we can actually start generating an economy here to actually start funding all of these initiatives. So,
thank you very much, Farah.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Richard Howard, and I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate here to be Mayor of Croydon. As it's been pointed out, Croydon is facing multiple crises. We have a financial crisis, we have a housing crisis, there's a cost of living crisis. But underpinning all of this is the climate crisis that we're all facing. However, there does not have to be trade-offs between those crises. We can actually tackle them all if we do it in a joined-up way. And this is what Croydon needs. It needs to have a joined-up council that is looking at these problems in tandem. We need to do things differently. It will require behavioural change, so we will have to make our everyday lives differently. But I want to take the community with me when I do that. That requires transformational leadership, and that's something that I have experience of throughout my time, both in the military and in my business experience. The Mayor has a huge opportunity to do things differently here in Croydon, and there is a number of ways they can do this. The first is to have a much more active role in the local waste partnership, making sure that we actually do recycle and not just burn the waste that we have there. The second one is to actually introduce the policies that will be sustainable into the other areas. We need to be building carbon neutral housing. We need to make sure that is part of the affordable housing side. We need to be making sure that we're increasing the use of renewables. And finally, we need to be able to have electric cars and electric car charging across the borough. So these are just some of the small ways. But to give you an example of how it's not working at the moment, we have a policy that we want everyone to recycle and we want everyone to reduce car use. But at the moment, you can't take your rubbish to the recycling if you don't have a car. That is a great example of how we are not doing things in a joined up way. But under my mayoralty, that will change.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. Can I just thank the organisers for having us here? Omar and William have done a fantastic job getting this organised. My name is Jeet Bains. I'm here on behalf of Jason Perry. Reason he's not here, he has a very long-standing family commitment. He just simply couldn't get out of it. So thank you for having me here instead. Conservative Party in Croydon is completely signed up to making sure we hit that 2030 target. But we're not going to hit it just by having words. We're not going to hit it by having files on shelves in the council. We actually have to get things done. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Planning policy. We've recently had a planning policy issued by the current Labour Council in which there was no protection of green spaces. Rather, it was about intensification. Complete intensification, converting houses into flats and huge blocks of flats in certain parts of town. We will not allow any such thing to happen. We will protect green spaces. Another example is waste management. We currently have a contract in the council with Veolia, who are in charge of many aspects of waste collection, from fly tipping to collecting your bins. There are no proper metrics on checking whether they're meeting their green targets. We'll make sure that that happens. And another really important one is the culture of the organisation. Currently in Croydon Council, there is just a downbeat, not performing well kind of culture. And you've got to get the culture of the organisation absolutely right to hit the performance targets that you want, whether it's on climate or anything else. These are the types of nuts and bolts issues we will get right in order to actually deliver on our climate targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all candidates for your opening remarks. We're now moving on to the pre-submitted questions. Obviously, there is pre-submitted questions. What we've done is we've compiled them into topics. So the first one, transport. Transport produced 27% of the UK's total emissions in 2019. The government transport decarbonisation plan and net zero strategy legally require local areas to set out their decarbonisation plans in their local transport plans. Croydon Council's local transport plan needs to set out how the council will deliver ambitious, quantifiable carbon reductions in transport, taking into account transport requirements of our town. So now a question to the candidates. How would you deliver ambitious and quantifiable carbon reductions in transport and safeguard children's health and safety in the process? We'll now be starting from Val this time and going in the same direction.
Yes, the real problem that we have in outer London is that we do not have enough public transport. And one of the things we need most clearly to be lobbying the government about is investment in our public transport services. We've had discussions about extensions of the trams over the years. There's still a photograph of Boris Johnson in Whitgift Centre supporting an extension to Crystal Palace, which hasn't yet arrived. So, you know, number one priority is actually extending our public transport services, and that's true for much of outer London. And obviously, the promotion of active transport is really important. I see cars being parked across the pavements, even though it's illegal in London all over Croydon. We need not just to do the big spending issues, but we need also the better management of enforcement and education in Croydon, so we can help people get around and walk, to have healthier streets. And we need the kind of cycling infrastructure that makes people safe in reality and feel safe to promote cycling. The topography of Croydon being kind of a bit hilly has been a bit of a barrier to cycling up until now, but now we've got the revolution of the electric bike. We actually do have great opportunities to do work there. Croydon has obviously got to work in collaboration with the TfL and with the government on these programmes. And you know, one of the big challenges again we face at the moment is that TfL has not had a long-term financial settlement yet from the government. There's this kind of 3-month hand-to-mouth. It works best in transport when there is long-term planning and collaborative planning for investment, and that's what we need to be promoting.
Val?
Thank you very much, Chair. You need to take radical action in areas like this, and something I'm going to pursue is workplace parking levy. Not only is it green, but it also means income for the borough, income that you can invest over the long term in transport. So if you're going to have lots and lots of extra housing down the Pelling Way, you're going to have to concede probably improving the five-ways junction, but at the same time, you want to be able to invest in that tram. Getting the loop, the tram that we're in Croydon will create extra capacity so that you're able to run more trams on that route, or on all of our routes. Valerie is right, I think that's the issue of drop curve enforcement is important, not only in terms of people's quality of life, but actually also for income as well. And so that's another way of the authority, shall we say, in some financial difficulties, raising money. We need to cross the Rubicon on the issue of Gavin. We've been very supportive of Gavin because of jobs, but I'm afraid to say we've got to wean ourselves off being in that alliance, running down the railway lines right under Gavin. We've got to stop promoting Gavin as an approach. We need to boost district centres so that people travel shorter distances. And we need to defend concessionary fares, of course, and we also, actually was Vice Chair of the London Road Safety Council, we need to make it safer for pedestrians. And we as a council want to be very supportive of City Hall in terms of pursuing the Vision Zero. I think I'll leave it there, because I always worry about the 2 minutes suddenly coming upon us. So I'm going to conclude there, but hopefully these are radical policies that will have real results at a local level.
So one of the things which Croydon's leadership have not been very good at is actually facing the facts of the situation in Croydon. And the facts are, if you wish to have a 15-minute city, it needs to be very much high-rise so that people can go in and out, and there's enough density of footfall and traffic to support local shops. Croydon is well spread out, particularly in the south, and it doesn't support that density. That's why South Kensington, 5 or 6 floors, can have a much greater number of shops and facilities in central London, whilst Croydon, with spread out detached homes of 2 stories, is not. So we have to adapt courses for courses. One of the policies I would have is to actually enable people in the north of the borough to increase the size of the house by having mansard roofs. And this is something that I achieved in various things in the central government, to have mansard roofs. The old way that cities used to be built, adding an extra layer into a 2-story building, or even 2 extra layers. So that's something that would not only provide a work from home space, it would reduce travel, it would increase density, and it would also provide local jobs for local people. And in terms of the transport, you have to be careful. You are not causing something worse by unintended consequences. You are someone who's 400 metres from Croydon, where they get a shop, Bromley, Bluewater, Westfield, even Stratford. It is ridiculous. You're sending them and pushing them miles and miles away. So that's where we have to make sure the balance and bring analytics and sense and sensibility to Croydon Council.
So just before you go, Farah, just to remind the candidates that the primary topic is transport for this question.
Thank you. So I was actually to a care home on Saturday, and I was speaking to the residents, and it's just like their proposals, and they were telling me that the bus links are so poor that they have to walk so far just to get the bus. So we have to make sure accessibility. We need to make sure that communities, especially vulnerable communities, whether it's disabled or elderly, have access to transport. We need to improve our transport coverage across Croydon because it's not great right now. Transport has to be safe as well. I speak to youth, but also elderly who don't feel safe in the transport, and they're scared of getting robbed just by going to the bus stop and back. So we really need to make sure that we're improving safety and accessibility, but also we need to find greener ways of how our transport system is working throughout the whole of Croydon. I know the government has initiated plans, and yes, the grants haven't come, so that's where we need to put pressure on the government that they do facilitate those grants so we can improve. And I want to work with other companies who can actually bring innovative ideas of how we can actually improve. Our urban planning in Croydon is awful, it's terrible, it's shameful, and that's because they haven't used the right expertise. So I want to make sure we employ the right urban planners to make sure we can operate a proper transport system throughout all of Croydon that will actually give the needs to the community that they need. Thank you.
I think one of the problems we have here in Croydon is that it's far too difficult to do the right thing when it comes to transport. And that means not being able to have the public transport available to use as it's there. Likewise, when it comes to cycling. So my children, I've got four young children, and they all love to cycle. But when taking them out on a bike ride, sometimes the dangers that they're facing are quite severe. And we've got to get people into the habit of cycling. If we want to reduce our carbon to be carbon neutral by 2030, people who are 18 in 2030 are 10 years old now. If they have a love of cycling and they can develop that and they know that it can be done safely, then they will be the people who will solve the problem in the future. So how do we get there in 2030? We need to start now, and we need to do that. So promoting safe cycling. The problem we have is the Highways Act was still from the 19th century that is not fit for purpose anymore. That's not something obviously that the mayor can do, but it is something that we need to understand that changes need to be made there. The other thing I'll say is that behavioural change is also when it comes to electric vehicles. If there are electric vehicles, people do want that personal freedom where public transport isn't there. One of our council candidates, John Jeffkins, managed to do a trip from John O'Groats to Land's End in his electric vehicle, showing that there isn't this range anxiety because he had charging points all the way through. If there was more availability of electric charging, then that would also be part of the solution. The reason people don't move these and make these changes and make these investments in a carbon neutral future is literally because we make it too difficult for them. So as mayor, what we've got to do is understand that people want to do the right thing, but to be able to help them to do that.
I think some of the things we've got to look at, one is data driven. What is it that people want? And are we providing the right data to help them do the right thing? So for example, my son, he has an app for when the next bus is coming. He'll literally sit at home and go, well, we'll sit there for 5 minutes and now I'll go. So he's got it down to the minute. Why is that available? Because we have the right infrastructure in place where people can get the right information and data to go and catch public transport. So we've got to make it easier for people to do the right thing. Supply and demand is another issue here. There is a demand from people to be able to cycle more, to use public transport more, but the supply of the right infrastructure has to be there. Do we have the right number of buses? Is there enough capacity on trams? If it isn't, those are the kinds of things you'd want a council to have the right voice to get right. So it's not about just grand dreams. You've got to get, as I said before, that nuts and bolts aspect right. And also, a lot of it is about joined up thinking. If you want people to cycle more, they've got to feel safe about cycling. If you think your bike's going to be nicked when you park it at the train station, that kind of discourages you a little bit of going on your bike. So we've got to make sure policing is right, and the cameras are in place, and the right funding is given to those areas. And so by doing those things, you get more encouragement for people to use the kind of transport that we'd like them to do. And all of that is underpinned by getting the finances right. As you know, at the moment, Labour has bankrupted Croydon Borough. We've had a number of reports in the public interest. And I don't know if you know this, we actually have a company called Kroll, KROLL. They are specialists in investigating money laundering, corruption and fraud, and they've been called in to investigate.
I agree with some of what the other candidates have said. In terms of transport, yes, we need to have far more investment in public transport, walking and cycling. One of the key points I make to people is the fact that lots of people in Croydon can't afford a car. So actually shifting the focus to be a benefit for people who aren't using public transport is as much about social justice as it is about climate justice. And I think that's an important thing we need to take into account. With the cost of living crisis, that's going to be even more true. So that's why, for the sake of people's cost of living, we need to be moving away from the car. Croydon was designed around car travel, and so the local plan is going to be a key part of actually transforming Croydon. Because one of the key things is we need to reduce the need to travel. I completely disagree with Gavin. The 50-minute city model works across Croydon, and that's the idea that we reduce the need to travel. So people don't need to be using their car as much because people have got access to shops, doctors, schools, places to work, all within 15 minutes of where they live by public transport. The other thing we need is an integrated transport system, and that's where I agree with Val. We need to be working with transport for London because some of our transport is controlled at London level, some of it is controlled at Croydon level. We need to be joining those up so that when you get off a train, you can find a cycle lane, that all works together. I was talking to somebody who just recently moved to Croydon, and they were saying that the cycle lanes don't go everywhere, and you suddenly find yourself at a junction that's completely unsafe. And they were saying actually they're more dangerous because they're suddenly to bad places. So we need to get all that integrated and sorted out. But it is shifting that whole focus of the local plan to move away from cars. That's why one of the things I really pushed for in the Climate Crisis Commission report, one of the indicator targets for Croydon should be a reduction in car ownership. Because that's the way it's showing we're moving in the right direction. If you only feel people willing to own a car, you're doing the right thing.
Thank you to all the candidates for answering the first batch of questions on transport. Just a quick reminder to everyone, please do keep silent while our candidates are speaking. As a reminder to the audience and the candidates themselves. Now, the second topic, behaviour. Transitioning to net zero and low carbon lifestyles will require changes in all sections of society and affect people's daily lives. From diet to the way we travel and do business, reducing waste and consumption to upgrading our homes. It is clear that everyone has a part to play. Okay, so this question goes to candidates again. How do you plan to engage with Croydon's diverse communities and deliver on the public behavioural change required to hit carbon neutral targets if there's public pushback? We'll be going from Andrew Pelling this time. And then in the same direction.
Thank you very much, Joe. I hope you'll reverse the direction some stage, but Gavin has to spend a long time waiting for maybe have a go what I might say. Not that you ever do that, it's fair to say. Actually, we have behavioural change. Maybe we will first of all start with North Harris. It actually takes, it's a bit actually, probably can't cross the threshold into the Harris Academy, to be fair. But why would you design something like this, for heating this much space? And what's the use of all that up there? To be honest, that's not very good behavioural activity. But anyway, when it comes to actually engaging with people, both I and the Democrats pursue a devolution agenda. That we believe that if decisions are made at a very local level, these type of agendas are much more likely to be pursued. So on issues to do with planning, on issues to do with people just making decisions at a local level about how money is spent, and that money will be spent better and in a wiser fashion. I also believe that individuals, when they're consuming their care, for example, the people who are receiving care should have an ownership on how that care is provided to them. If people have a greater sense of possession, and those people are great believers in having a green approach towards life, that sustainability will come. And as you suggested in your introduction, Jeet, if you pursue a prospect of people living well, and we have a very good living well program which teach people and encourage and coach many people to manage their diet, as you say, and their lives better, we will all enjoy their quality of life and actually enjoy the environment that we all want to protect. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of behavioural change that needs to happen, I believe, in Croydon Council, the servants and the councillors, as you probably well know. And unfortunately, this you can try the softly approach, you can try the incentives, and sometimes you just have to be blunt. And one of the things you can rely on me is to be pretty straightforward and blunt, even if it gives me a lot of flack. And in my 30 years as a volunteer in corporate governance, tackling chairman of Royal Bank of Scotland, it's a pretty tough, blunt world of battling for change for the country. Some of the behaviours are small, some of them are large. One of the things that we have to address as facts is that someone can buy a car for £3,000–4,000 with a petrol motor, but it'll cost £35,000 for an all-electric car with a 1-year waiting list. Croydon is not rich South Kensington. And if you go to the car parks, that person who can afford that £35,000 car gets a 90% reduction on the car parking fee. So you're rewarding the rich for buying an electric car and punishing the poor for having to be poor. So we have to encourage adjustments, show the cost savings, and that's where a local bank run for Croydon, Pelling, you can name it after me, but I'm not that egotistical, would help people in getting car finance and making them be able to do the ecological choice. The same with solar panels, the same with other areas. And it can be a facilitator easier. And one of the things as well that I encourage the government to do is to change the ISA saving products so that 10% of that would be put towards green environmental policies, which would create an enormous amount of free capital. And the climate change resolution is already working after 7 years, and Shell, which was 20 billion a year, we shift already 1.5 billion. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you.
Pride. We need people to feel pride again about where they live. And how can you feel proud when the streets are filthy? So my #1 priority is to make sure that we have a waste company that is actually doing its job, or they're sacked. Because the moment our streets are cleaner, then people are going to start wanting to take care of their environment that they live in. And that's why I really want to encourage teaching people, giving them the courses so they can actually start actively going out in the environment and helping. Because if we actively pull in together, we can make sure we feel pride in where we're living. And that's not happening right now. So that's why I'm going to make sure that anyone that wants to volunteer, get involved, we give them the tools and skills that they need. Now, it's very interesting, you know, we're talking about cultural behavioural change. People are fed up of Croydon and how it's mismanaged and everything. So we just need the right leadership to make sure we can all be invested together. Affordability. We need to help people to go green. We need to make sure grants are accessible so we actually have sustainable living practices. So we can actually change the behavioural change within our communities, but we have to do it together. I had a great talk with Trees for Streets, where they're doing great programs where they're planting trees in streets. So they're basically getting rid of this concrete jungle that we're living in. So we really need to make sure we really invest in different types of tree species across the borough to really make us be able to breathe clean air again. There's so much more that we could be doing that we're not doing enough, but we need the right leadership to make sure we change behavioural change across the borough and do it together.
Behavioural change is something I mentioned in my opening speech, and I think this is the key to us delivering net zero by 2030, because it does mean that people will have to live their lives differently. Whether it's the way that they move about, whether it's the transport they have, whether it's the houses that they live in, the amount of waste that they produce to do that, changes are going to have to be made. And that is difficult, and it does require leadership to do that, to bring people along and make those changes. My experience, I know lots of people think in the military, I was in the army for nearly just under 19 years, I'm sure people think that we sort of bark orders at people and they just, do what we say. It's actually a lot more collaborative than that, and you have to bring people with you, because when things go wrong, you need them to be following the plan. When things get difficult and when things get tough, and the way you do that is you make it their plan. The people that will always follow when times get tough are the people who are invested in the plan and feel that they own it and they are a part of it. And that means making sure that they are there in the decision-making phase, and they are there understanding what the problem is and delivering it. My experience of transformation and leadership is that you have to set a clear vision. You have to tell people what good looks like. You have to tell people what is better and communicate that really clearly. The next thing you have to do is you've got to deliver quick wins. And those quick wins are what keep people bought into the process and they're bought into the plan. Now, this goes back to what Andrew said. We are both keen advocates of devolution. What are quick wins here in Thornton Heath or in Thornton Green are not going to be the same things in Sanderson. And the people who will know what can be delivered at one time in that time frame are the people who live in those communities. We have to devolve the power down to them. We have to give them that decision making, and we also have to give them the budget to do this. So that is how I would lead the change required to deliver this, what I think is the key point of delivering carbon neutral by 2050.
A lot of meetings that I go to, residents that I meet, a lot of residents association meetings I've been to, rarely, if ever, have I found anyone these days who doesn't want to do the right thing. So in terms of behavioural change, I think we're, by and large, there will be exceptions, we're kind of pushing out an open door. People want to, by and large, do the right thing if we make it easy for them. So a good example was I went to a resident association recently where somebody said, did you know that Co-op is providing a facility to recycle soft plastics, bags and things? Now, that's the thing the council should be providing for you. We shouldn't be hearing about it in a residents association meeting that some co-op is doing it. Why isn't the council doing that? The council should provide that. But there's another thing. So I think, the provision of stuff the council should do. But it should also be fair, and people should see that there is fair treatment going on. So we've seen a number of examples. I get a lot of casework about on a road, there are people with 4 cars, and they've got a drop curb, and they don't use the one outside the drop curb, they park all over the road, and I can't park outside my own house. Now this is just not fair, and it's not beyond the wit of man to get that right. And so I think in all of these kind of incentives and behavioural changes, one key element is that people must see and feel that the fair kind of implementation is taking place. And the third point I wanted to make was around what the council itself can do. The council, as a kind of in a leadership role, should set an example. They should be explicitly telling people, burn Weatherall House. This is how we're saving energy here. This is how we're encouraging lagging and insulation in properties that we own. Here's how we're making a difference on all the multi-million pounds worth of contracts that we manage, how we're making a difference in terms of behavioural change there. So these are practical things that we can do. Thank you.
I will pick up one. All of the surveys show the majority of people are in favour of action on climate change and implementation. We're not having to force people to change their minds on this. We need to build on that. When I worked in government, the drink driving campaign was always cited as one of the most successful, where it changed people's attitudes to realise how reckless and dangerous their behaviour was as a drinking driver. And we need to be using those sorts of images to educate people to understand about some of those activities that are dangerous to the climate, dangerous to the environment. But also, one of the things I want to sort of undercut in this is this capitalised idea that you can tackle climate change through changing personal choices. It's not going to happen. The system is designed to force people into those choices. And so that's why we said at the start, we need to look at those systemic changes. We should be looking at better ways of reducing waste, of recycling waste. We should be stopping the waste occurring in the first place. Working with those businesses, because people don't have a choice about how much wrapping all of their stuff comes in from the supermarket. People don't have a choice about the things they're being offered. That's safe, it's just not true. So we need to be tackling that systemic. We need to be working with businesses to change their behaviour, and that enables people to make better choices about the way that their life is working. So yeah, we're looking at things like transport, waste, all those issues. It's the systemic systems, and that's where the council needs to be taking a lead in terms of how the council is framing things, how the council is working with businesses, and equally how the council is then putting pressure on those bigger companies. One of the things I'm talking with some of the litter picking groups, what we need to start doing is showing how much of that litter has got McDonald's written on it and Coca-Cola, and start embarrassing those companies. But they're the ones who are producing the litter that ends up on our street. They're the people we should be embarrassing. We know that in the past they've paid sort of finance campaigns to try and put pressure on to people rather than them for producing it in the first place, and we need to reverse that.
I totally agree that the issue today is about how people's choices are conditioned by the reality around them. And the point, I think, for what the council can do is how can the council change the balance of the decisions people can make. People might be being told that they should be burning less energy, but if you live in an uninsulated house, if you live in a house where there are no photovoltaics on the roof, then your options are actually very limited. And those are things that the council can have a role in. We can work with a Croydon energy cooperative organisation to put local renewable projects in. We can bid for grants to help insulate people's homes. If you live in a block of flats and you have a private sector owner or even a public sector owner, you don't have the power to insulate your home. It's something you need to have organised for you. And that's what we should be focusing on, how we can facilitate people to live greener lives. The same is true on the energy sector, on the transport sector that we talked about, and you know, it's absolutely true as Peter said on the consumer issues that we should all be working on. We can encourage people to go and shop at markets, for example, which is much greener, but actually we do need to be fighting for those systemic changes. I think it's also true that we also need to be mobilising the community. The community wants to do so much more in terms of management of the parks and doing you know, regreening, rewilding and biodiversity. I think the community wants to be doing those things, and it's time actually Croydon Council was, and the Mayor can help with this, there's much more humility about saying we should be working on these things together and we should be facilitating it.
Once again, a big thank you to all the candidates for sharing their opinions on how we can change behaviour. We'll now be moving on very promptly to the question about housing. Housing makes up 51% of carbon emissions in Croydon, and 125 Croydon neighbourhoods are fuel poverty hotspots, the majority of which are areas of social deprivation. We know that through upgrading and retrofitting housing, damp can be eradicated, and with it, the impact on children's and adults' health. New green jobs can be created and families can save money on energy bills. So, what are your plans to upgrade and retrofit Croydon Council property, its social housing, and how could you drive the retrofitting and upgrading of outsourced rented accommodation, private homes and businesses? This time I'll be starting with Richard, going in the reverse direction.
Well, housing obviously is a key issue that we have here in Croydon. And getting carbon neutral into our housing is going to be extremely challenging. Not only because of the climate issues that we have here, but also just the underlying issue that we have with the level of infrastructure that we have here in Croydon. The conditions that were revealed on John Road on the news recently, and now that seem endemic across the entire of Croydon have shown that we are so far away from being in that situation, which has been highlighted there as the target we need to get to. First of all, what we need to do is we need to understand the state of play where we are at the moment. And unfortunately, we don't know that. The council are supposed to deliver metrics as to what proportion of their housing reaches what's called the decent home standard that the government provide. But if you look at those figures, you can see that they cannot possibly be correct. They currently state that 99.68% meet that standard. So we are a million miles away from even just understanding what the scale of the problem is in order to do this. So that's the first priority, and that would be my third priority as mayor, would be to understand what the monitoring system is and find out what the state of our properties. From then, we need a period of investment, and we're going to need to find funding in order to provide that investment. Now, the mayor gives an opportunity to lobby for greater funding from central government and from other sources, and also to try and bring in private funding as well. This needs to be done to basically solve the problem from start from now to solve the problem in 2030. Because at the moment, what we have is we have a sticking plaster over a sticking plaster over a sticking plaster. And we need to have a long-term plan and a long-term infrastructure.
I was talking to an elderly resident yesterday, and her front door was so badly decayed that basically it has a hole in it, and it took her almost over a year for the council to come and actually do something about it. In that time, she's lost her husband, and her health got worse. She's putting heat on, but it's going straight out the door. And Croydon Council told her we only have one carpenter for the whole of Croydon. That's why it's taken so long. So the problem is we don't have the staff, we're not responsive. My father had to live in mould for over 2.5 years. The council was nothing about it, calling them every week, and he got COPD. So we need to make sure the council is actually doing its job and doing responsive work for the residents, because right now they're not doing anything. They're too slow, and then the residents are suffering across. Yeah, they're killing people, and that's not acceptable. So we need to make sure the council actually does its job and actually responds to those calls. We need to make sure that we're responsive. So within 24 hours, if there's an emergency, get out. An old elderly lady should not have a hole in her front door for over a year and a half. That's just not acceptable. So under my leadership, I'm going to make sure the council actually starts working.
Life is ruled by incentives. And clearly, in the council and with Axis, who are running both the call centre and the repair services, the incentive is clearly wrong. They don't want to report. If they're going to do a fixed, I'm sure they're charging for every single visit. I was in New Addington this afternoon, meeting a distraught woman in a nail salon at 95 Fairchild Avenue. And she's been in a very cramped, leaking flats. There's about 9 out of the 12, so I presume there's a leak on about the 3rd floor. There's numerous calls out to Sarah Jones, her MP, no result either. The incentives have to be changed. You have to have enforcement inspectors. One of the first things I do is asking for experienced inspectors to have proper reports, to have actually the standard. This all must be done. And this is, I'm a landlord myself. I once had black mold. I actually sat in the property to work out what the problem. A couple of things are. One is how you manage your ventilation, trickle vents, extractors. There's also, you can have trickle fans to take out and bring in fresh air, not put in the wrong way. You also need to have some insulation on the coldest walls. And the other thing is you need to have people who understand natural ventilation in UK homes. Because if you close off everything like a small bag, it will create water on the cold surfaces. That water has got your germs on it, it will go into black mold, it will grow. So part of it is education, part of the enforcement. Every house that the council owns should have an automatic door closer for the shower. It costs about £15. It keeps the steam out of the rest of the building, and you don't have as much black noise. Simple, effective. I've done it on my houses. It's worked for 15, 20 years. These are the things you get when you've got someone who's a practical, intelligent problem solver with a mechanical engineering background and a history of fixing things.
Well, Chair, as a landlord, it's fair to say that I'm a tenant. And my experience sometimes with some landlords is that if you are having a lot of heat going out of the house, the landlord just doesn't bother. If you've got mould, they don't really bother. And actually, that fortunate the council over the years has been very condescending to tenants. They always say it's the way you put your washing out, which is better been said for about 40 years. In many cases, and maybe I'd be very radical, places like Regina Road have come down. It's just not going to work trying to make those places in the energy efficient, let alone a place where people can live properly. Now, I feel very controversial in what I've said, in that I think we need to go for turbocharged right to buy, because we're not very good at this business in housing. But I want to use that money not only for paying off debt, but also for building real council housing. People talk about affordable housing. It's not really affordable. It's just a little bit less unaffordable than other housing. The council has mucked up landlord licensing. Indeed, we didn't even provide the right documents. If we had landlord licensing, and it's fair to say it wasn't government, we are reasonable as well over this, but if we had landlord licensing, we would have much more leverage with landlords on issues like this. Finally, what I'd like to say is that there will be opportunities actually in the private sector. Companies like BlackRock, who are desperate for yield and return, will look for opportunities in this area. L&G, I think, also done something very recently in this area, where you can invest in projects where you're saving energy and they're also taking some kind of return as well. And actually, in the end, it is going to be about a mayor being, reaching out in a way to that kind of private sector to try to find money. The council, because of its financial problems, is going to find it very hard to do that. And for the first time, since the first time I talked a bit about myself, my background is in investment banking, and I believe I have the contacts to bring that money in. Thank you very much.
I remember Sir David King coming to City Hall years ago when I was there with Ken Livingstone, and he talked about the low-hanging fruit. What is the first thing you should be doing in terms of reducing energy costs? And it was definitely about insulating homes, and it's really been a challenge to get that going when there's been governments who are not really interested. The fact is we could be doing so much more on insulating homes, insulating flats, introducing efficient boiler systems. It's something we could be doing through the council, but also we could be giving advice to private owners about what the right technology, what is affordable and how to do it, and what the market is about. And it's something we should be helping other social landlords with. Definitely, we know we've got to improve the management of the housing department, that goes without saying. But it's important, of course, not just for energy reduction, but it is important for the cost of living challenge that's going on at the moment. If you go to somewhere like Totnes, where there's more of a sort of green culture in a way, you'll see photovoltaics on people's roofs. And I do think there's so much more we could be facilitating people to do with loans, for example, in Croydon. I would also say it's a mistake to think that the private sector landlords, which build, rather expensive looking flats, have got it right. Because my experience of places like Saffron House is that they have really inefficient heating systems. And so we ought to be giving advice to private sector tenants about how to go about becoming self-managing agents, because they could be doing so much more for themselves. And lastly, I do think that the council's planning powers are key to making sure that the future housing and property will drive forward energy efficiency.
Quickly running through something. In terms of new builds, we shouldn't be aiming for carbon neutral, we should aim for carbon negative. That's part of the planning system, but that's not been enforced. Similarly, we don't have the enforcement officers working in the council to actually make sure that developers do what they promise anyway. So I've noticed it going around Tower Blocks, and they're boiling at the moment because the heating is still pouring, right? It's just completely inefficient and really badly managed. In terms of the council's own stock, we know how badly it's been managed. I've made the commitment that for me, I would take the contract away from Access. I don't like these big contracts being given to multinational companies. They should be broken up and given to local businesses. So that's employing people locally, it's providing jobs, it's providing training, so that we've got the skilled people in Croydon who can do the installation work, who can do all the retrofitting that we need done across all the properties, because we start by training them up in terms of doing the council work. There is some money available, grants and systems like that, but it is a bit of a mess. I know when I tried to find out what I could get for my little masonette, it's like, oh, well, you can't have that because you haven't got this, or you've got to spend money on that before you can get that. The council can, one of the things the council should be doing is providing that advice service to join those up, so that people can be walked through the process of, this is what you need to do first, this is what you can then apply for and what you can then apply for, so that people who have got the money to do it can actually be walked through what they need to be doing in terms of their own properties. In terms of landlords, I agree, we need a much stronger grip on the private landlord markets. The government has removed far too many restrictions on that. If the government won't introduce that, I think we need tenants' unions actually getting tenants joining together and demanding better conditions. I was in a block yesterday where there was water dripping down through the stairwell. That's a danger for health, electricity, all sorts of reasons. We need to be empowering those tenants to be able to fight back against the developers, the landlords who are clearly not serving them right. I could go on.
There's nothing green about mold dripping down the walls. We're talking about getting more insulation into council-owned properties. We should get more solar panels, more wind generators, but of course we should. But first of all, we need an audit of where is that actually possible. Because we have some really fundamental problems far before we get anywhere near having renewable energy in some of these places. I sat on the housing scrutiny committee, and I have, by profession, I help organisations improve the way they operate and how they do things. And I've got some experience with housing associations as well. And I asked the council, do you have the right processes for finding out when something goes wrong in a block of flats that you own? And they have no monitoring process for doing it. It's a random, if somebody happens to phone in, they might get around to it if they've got the time and the resources. Some of the best housing associations, they have processes whereby there's automatic monitoring of leaking and safety problems, or even if somebody phones in, a housing officer will go out there with a laptop and take a picture of it, and it's uploaded, and the repairs company gets out very, very quickly, and it's sorted. Within the council, we have this very antiquated, somebody might phone and we'll get around to it. So we've got some real nuts and bolts operational issues to fix in the council in order to get people living safely and securely in their accommodation, as well as, of course, putting in the right insulation and solar panel and wind generated power where that's possible. But I'm afraid to say there are no easy answers here. The state that the council is in at the moment, there are some really, really bad issues that we've got to just get on top of and solve. Thank you.
So thank you all very much for your answers. I would now like to open questions up to the floor. I would like to remind you to keep your questions concise and do focus on environmental issues only. Each candidate in turn will have the opportunity to answer your questions, Any questions we don't get to ask will be emailed to all candidates if they respond if they wish. I believe also the live stream audience will also have a chance to ask questions. I'll give it to Alderman.
I'd like to ask a specific question about trees. How important are trees, and what is the policy of planting new trees and replacement trees? Over the last 6 years, the present Labour administration and the planning committee passed a regulatory new infill developments on council-owned green spaces have lost many hundreds of well-established trees which have not been replaced on a one-to-one basis. And when they have been replaced, they have mostly often been replaced with inappropriate trees and of poor quality. Also, due to recent storms, we have lost many other trees. I believe all trees that have been cut down due to building developments, either by private council or for private developments, should be replaced not just on a one-for-one basis, but at least on a two-for-one basis with appropriate trees. Could I have all your candidates' opinions about that?
Did you want the question? Okay. Can we go again from Jeet in the bubble?
You're absolutely right. It's a disgrace that these trees have been ripped up and not replaced. We have a lot of problems regarding trees. I mean, on the roads in the area that I represent, we have entire roads where trees have been taken out. And I keep on emailing the council to say, when are you going to replace them? And the only answer I get back is, we don't have the budget, we can't do it, there are rules and regulations in place. Then they came up with a scheme, which was something like sponsor a tree. But if your road can get together and stump up the money to £350 for a tree, and then it's your job to then water it and look after it. Then what's the council do it for? So I think it's an utter disgrace the way the council is behaving at the moment. The solution is, first of all, don't rip them out if they don't need to be. B, have some care, have some regard for how people feel, and replace it. There should be a rule in place, life for life, and you have to look after it and take care of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the things that Jeet said there. It is a disgrace that these trees have been ripped out and not been replaced. I live in the same area as Jeet actually, and I've seen the problems that we have there. And streets without trees are just not pleasant environments to be in, for one. We need something to break that up, but also they're so vital when it comes to biodiversity. And when you see the large gardens that in certain places are being knocked down and creating houses, when those gardens back onto themselves, it creates a really large green space in between those. And the amount of the wildlife that you see in those areas between those gardens is amazing. And I've seen this before in various places that I've lived. When you then see things like green woodpeckers in those areas. Why? Because they think that is a green space that has been created from these gardens here. So I think there's a huge problem with ripping up the trees that we have there. A good solution to this, and one that we've seen literally where Jeet and I live in the Aston Rec area, some new cherry blossom trees planted, but it was the local residents association that did that, and it should be the council that has.
And building on gardens as well.
Exactly. So when you build in a garden, you're not just losing light and space, you're losing those combined green spaces as those gardens back into each other. I go back to something that I've mentioned before. It's about evolution. It's about putting power back into local communities so that they have the power and they have the funding. And what I would propose to do is to devolve a minimum of 50% of the community infrastructure levy that any developments are made in that area to the local community. Now that funding would be there to replace the trees. It would be there to offset
the impacts of those developments in those communities, in the way that that community sees that.
Thank you very much.
I love trees and we currently don't have enough, and the problem is tree pits. So other councils actually fund tree pits. Our council doesn't because, again, they don't have the money. Any resident that wants a tree pit outside, we should be offering them that service. So what we were talking about, Jeet, Trees for Streets, what they've been doing, it's an incredible organisation, but they have been working with the council and they're the ones who are actually planting trees if the residents want and they're funding it. But other councils actually give them the money to do it. Our council doesn't. So I want to work with these incredible organisations to make sure we are planting trees, but the right trees. We need to make sure we have a variety of different species that will be relevant to the environment that they're in. So it's very important we ensure we're planting trees, the right species, and also tree pits. I don't know if you've heard about engineering tree pits. So for example, they're incredible where they can actually help the environment from flooding or flash flooding. So we need to make sure that we're planting engineering tree pits as well to help with the mass flooding that we're getting in the south of Croydon. So trees all the way.
I agree with them all, and I agree with you as well, because it's a natural attrition rate in terms of trees actually surviving and thriving. And I'd like to take an idea from the Mayor of Bristol, George Ferguson, where they actually planted a tree for each of the students that were in the city of Bristol. Tree prick, exactly, and the same in terms of planting trees. My mother lived on an avenue. Out of the 3 trees that were outside, 2 died, both removed, and never replaced. And that had taken 10 years. So, what else can I say? Part of the problem is that basically it seems that developers are treated like gods, and sadly the residents who have to live there with the consequences are treated like serfs. So that's a matter of forcing the developers to pay, and including the changing the SILT, the Community Infrastructure Levy, which in central Croydon for residential housing is £0.
Thank you very much, Chair. Where the questioner lives, green space has been lost and replaced by grid private development, which is empty. It's appalling. The planning system here is so poor that it can't, even in a time of housing crisis, actually house people. And the 2 big units where this questioner lives are empty. Green spaces have been taken. Now, when it comes to trees, I was particularly displeased when I was campaigning with someone who was until very recently a fellow Labour candidate in Croydon, that I was mocked by Labour councillors for wanting to have trees in tree beds. They thought it was fun to mock the fact that I was campaigning for that, and this other prospective councillor, Rowena Davis, and that affects an attitude. And I'm afraid there's a bit of a history, because I remember campaigning to save the beech trees in Allington Park, which got unnecessarily cut down and not been replaced. Fine, it's not been around a very long time, isn't it? I'm talking about something from the beginning of this century. But my view is that trees are important also to provide shade, important in the context of climate change. When you have increased temperatures, you need to have shade to help people, the vulnerable and the elderly. But also, I think that when it comes to Wellesley Road, despite all the complications of services under there, that needs to be, at the very least, a tree-lined avenue. So we can be very positive about this. And it's fair to say, actually, that there is some dismantling. I can't remember whether the very good tree officer who was interested in a variety of trees is still around. But we must indeed take advantage of the limited amount of money that comes to us from elsewhere for tree planting.
Yeah, I think tree protection and tree planting is a really extremely high priority. They are fantastic mechanisms for carbon capture. They reduce air pollution, they reduce noise, they absolutely increase biodiversity, especially if they're indigenous species like oak, and they reduce the sort of urban heat island impacts, and you don't need so much air conditioning. So absolutely, and it is tragic to see so many empty tree pits where trees have been knocked over or died and gone and pulled away and not been refilled. There is money available for planting trees, and we absolutely must be doing it because it's about our health as well as the environment and our sense of well-being and the attractiveness of the area. I do think we need to do more. I know we can do more to protect green spaces in Croydon, and it's tragic to see places being built on that are green already, and we do not need to do that. If we need to intensify development, it should be along the public transport routes, it should be around stations, and not in those areas where we will be taking gardens or green spaces or little pocket parks, which are really, really important for the future. So what can I say? But everybody loves trees. We need 3 trillion more on this planet. I'm told, but we're told by the IPCC. And I think all of us would feel that our town is even more beautiful if we could plant more trees and look after them properly.
Important for the birds as well.
Absolutely.
I agree with what's been said. Trees are vital for reducing flooding, reducing pollution. They keep street temperatures down, which is the climate's changing. We need that even more importantly. One of the things that's not been mentioned, I think that's vital for trees in Croydon, is they improve mental health. Yeah. In terms of just having that greenery, that we're not living in these concrete tunnels, and it just brings a bit of life to streets in all senses. And so I think it's vitally important that we have more street trees. One of the key issues, people talk about the council, developers have been ripping out trees all over the place because it's not seen as an asset. And we don't have planning enforcement officers who are doing anything when developers go and cut down trees. There have been a few sites in Croydon, I know, where the developers, before they've even got planning permission, have gone in and cut down all the trees to stop that being an objection to them getting planning permission. Because if there were bat roosts or badger sets or things like that involved, it would stop them doing what they want. So we need to do that enforcement up front. I agree with comments already been made. Section 106 money, the money we get from those developers, some of that should go back into living infrastructure in terms of trees in our streets. Professionally, I'm involved in tree planting. I've planted thousands, it's lovely. And I'm currently involved in a partnership of charities under the London Assembly. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, one of the things I support that he does, is committed to increase tree coverage across the whole of London. And I think Croydon needs to tap into that, and where there is grant funding available, and making sure we get our fair share of those trees coming into Croydon. If you go to places like Addington Viewpoint and look out across Croydon, it is great to see how green Croydon is. It does have enough trees to qualify as a forest in terms of density, but we need to be doing more of that. We need to be investing in that because, as I said, street trees struggle because of where they are. We need to make sure we've got a cycle of replacement so that as trees die off, they are replaced, and so we get Croydon should be greener.
We've just had a question from one of our online viewers, and the question is, as someone who lives not far from Purley Way and who suffers from severe asthma, I would like to know what action any of the candidates will be taking to combat the air pollution there caused by too much traffic and the fumes from the nearby incinerator. Is there anyone in particular who'd like to start, Farah?
I mentioned earlier about microalgae installations, and they're key to actually put in areas where there's heavy pollution. Because like I said, within days they've been designed to capture the carbon dioxide, the metal, and convert it to oxygen, and it happens within days. And the more pollution, the more the microalgae will grow. So that's why countries like Singapore, Germany, Mexico, they actually have installed these. They've been proven to be successful. They've improved air quality, and that's why 100% we need to make sure we put microalgae installations across Croydon. Microalgae installations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, so I was reviewing some very instructive inside Croydon articles about the incinerator. And I'd recommend all people to read Inside Croydon. Probably not necessarily for mental health, because it is truly depressing what's been happening in Croydon, but it is a lighter view of it. What I've noticed, and it seems to be, is that somehow in the contracts between Viridian and Veolia, that there is something perverse, and it seems to me that they are encouraging the burning of plastics instead of recycling plastics, and it's causing excessive amount of pollution and smoke and particulates. Certainly the same as the Farah, and there can be certain hedging and things like that, a level where we have some barriers and we have some plants that can pick up some of the pollution and take it down into the soil and then be recycled with leaves and trees and like that.
Chair, I think we will all I'm very grateful to Gavin for mentioning Inside Croydon. One of the reasons why I was speaking terminally as a Labour Party member is because I speak to Inside Croydon. Transparency is important. First of all, the previous Conservative council did not issue that contract that we had with the incinerator. Labour promised to do it, and I remember being told by Tony Newman shortly after the election, when Labour were elected, the promise that they would publish it. Terribly sorry, we're not going to do it. You actually need a mayor who's going to be strong with the officers and actually tell them if you make promises to them, you're going to deliver on them. Okay? Now, as it happens, I represent, by the way, because I'm a ward councillor, and pollution is so bad, when we get planning permission for a school there, it had to be hermetically sealed at the front. So that's the Harris on the bloody way. So we really seriously have got to take this concern very importantly. And so the situation is, as I said earlier in my preliminary speech, we need to have workplace parking levy so that we're going to invest in public transport. So that where we're going to have lots of extra housing, I hope, and meet lots of demands for extra housing, it's going to be public transport that underpins that. Because it is not a healthy life there. It's fair to say that when you talk to the planning department, when I was especially concerned about that hermetically sealed school, they said, don't worry, Hurley Way is very breezy, it all blows away. And that is a reflection. That is a reflection of what is wrong. What is wrong with it? So yeah. So you know, that is what is wrong. There's an example of what's wrong with the governance of this council. We can have a lot of aspirations. Unless you sort out the corrupt governance of this council, a lot of these things are not going to get delivered.
Yeah, I guess so. So, by the way, when I was deputy mayor at City Hall for transport, I led for Sadiq Khan on the creation of the ultra low emission zone in central London, and the proposal now is to spread that across London. While I totally agree with it, there is actually something we need to change, I think, throughout London. I think we need a much better scrappage scheme to allow people on lower incomes to acquire, to lease electric vehicles, for example. But I think that's really important for us, that we should now be moving towards an ultra low emission zone for the whole of London. I think also we talked about the need for modal shift, how important it is to get people into sustainable transport and out of polluting cars. You know, we really ought to be thinking about something like an electric copper bus service along Purley Way, as well as we've just been talking about more tree planting. On the incinerator, we are unfortunately locked into this 25-year contract, and I think that which is terrible. I think the incinerator is an appalling thing, not just because of its pollution, because it distorts the management of waste and locks us into an anti-recycling waste economy. But I would, as mayor, want to take up one of the 2 polling places on the sub-regional waste authority to influence that. And I think until we've got to explore what we can do about that, but we could start by having a look at whether or not we can
have that upgraded technically to make sure it's not polluting as it is at the moment, because I'm sure there must be better technologies available for that incinerator. But I think the incinerator is a terrible thing.
In terms of mitigating the current situation on Pelling, we talked about reducing transport, greenery to absorb pollution, important things like that. I was very disappointed that the last proposal that came through for Five Ways Junction without actually trying to get more traffic into going into the centre of Croydon by building a dual carriageway through Douglas Hill Park. Now, thankfully, that plan seems to have drifted away, but that seems to be the attitude of just trying to get more traffic coming into Croydon when we should be going in the opposite direction. In terms of the incinerator, I'm very proud to know Sasha Khan, who campaigned against that right from the start, took it all the way to judicial review, and I wish he'd won, so we didn't have the incinerator built. One of the things I find shocking is the fact that all of the government, all of the councils, as part of the South London Waste Plan, have declared a climate emergency, but there is no profile to reduce the amount of waste going to the incinerator. They are continuing to burn more and more. They've just given permission for more waste to be burned there. And one of my commitments is now that's what will happen. If I come in, we will start working to reduce the waste going to the incinerator. I don't believe we're locked into the contract. I think that's what officials have been telling councillors. It's nonsense. If we're democratically elected to change it, we can get out of that contract. And we shouldn't, because it was wrong to be signed in the first place. So that's one of my commitments. But yeah, getting in as mayor, we will start profiling for reducing waste across Croydon, definitely cutting the waste going to the incinerator, to getting that as close to zero as possible by 2030, if not closing it down completely.
I said at the beginning of our hustings today that I'm going to focus on practical, operational, nuts and bolts things that the council can actually do. So the question was around Pearly Way. So a real example for you, there's a consultation released by the current Labour Council on planning policy. More than 800-page document released around January, February, and we had just a few weeks members of the public to comment on. Buried within it were things called intensification zones. They had a thing called moderate intensification, which is basically if you live in a house and there's a house next to you and there's a gap in between developing the gap, that's called moderate intensification apparently. But deep intensification was certain areas of Croydon where huge blocks of flats were planned to be approved and put up, one of which was Pearly Way. So the first thing to do is to stop that happening. Right? We are not going to allow blocks of flats to be built on that green part of Pearly Way, certainly. So there's some practical policy things that councils can do pretty quickly. The consultation has actually now been stopped until we see what the results of the election is. Regarding the incinerator, I mean, there is a contract in place. Peter says, if you win the election and you have the mandate of the people, you can do what you want. Well, I don't know what a judge would say. I'm not a lawyer. But if you don't have the power, you do have influence. It's not the case that you can just do nothing. You can make your case to the people who run that incinerator. Can we upgrade the technology? Can we reduce the amount of emissions? And can we plant more trees around that to absorb both the pollution and block people off from getting mal-affected? Thank you.
I think a lot of good points have been made so far. The first thing I will say is that this is an area I share quite a lot of Gavin and Peter on when it comes to the incinerator. The alternative to landfill is not that it vanishes magically. The alternative to landfill is lungfill. It doesn't just go into the ground; it goes into your lungs. And this is what we're seeing with the standard of air quality in Warden, also stretching across to Addiscombe and Shirley. The plumes from the incinerator to go there. It was a decision made based upon a set of criteria a while ago. And things have changed, things have moved on. We need to be preparing for a post-incinerator Croydon. And there is a contract in place. We need to see what we can do when it comes to volumes of waste that goes to the incinerator. But if using the influence that we have on the waste partnership, the two places that are there, if we can start making it clear to the contractor there that we as a borough are preparing for a post-incinerator Croydon, then that will be the mechanism by which we can reduce it and eventually close it down. And it would be my hope that it would close down within the 25 years that it was there. Now that would be my aspiration, but as Jeet points out, there are legal things that you have to go through. So that is my position on the incinerator. The way that we do that is that we have to reduce waste overall. We have to have a policy, and the council can lead on that. When it comes to planning and intensification, I will say that the SPD2 document that lists those moderate and intensified will go. That is not a document that needs to be borough-wide. That is a document that needs to be at the local level and at the neighbourhood level. So when we devolve power down to neighbourhoods and down to communities, it will be for the local communities to decide what the design guide and what houses that they have in that area.
We are obviously running out of time, and it's now time for closing statements, unless everyone is willing to stay for one more question.
Yeah, Andrew said no. Yeah.
Okay, if not, I'm happy to move to closing statements, and we'll do it in reverse order. A quick yes/no question. Yeah, so now we'll be moving to
So a one-word answer. So
it can only be a one-word answer.
Do you want to come so they can hear it?
May or June, hosting, they give a presentation by some practical families to give the information they gave to Boris Johnson when he first became Prime Minister, and the vote of Glasgow, so the committee can host that for MPs and cabinet. When you come there, will you, and it's going to be publicly available, will you present that to the councillors, will you show that to the councillors of the council, and make it publicly available on the council website?
That was speedy.
And building better, building beautiful by Roger Scruton.
Okay, lovely. So now we'll be moving to the closing statements, and we'll do it in, actually, we'll not do it in reverse order because I believe Gavin hasn't started any questions yet. So we'll go from Gavin, and we'll go in the order in which we started with, so we'll be ending with Andrew.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, we must address climate change, and we must make sure that we plan it and make it happen. There are big swing items we can do, and there are small items we can do, and there are middle-sized items we can do. And each needs a well-thought-out plan. And what I ask of you and for everyone in terms of the environmental world is to make sure that you consider the life cycle costing. There are new technologies which outdate old ones. There are new things which come up. Solar is now cheaper than nuclear, but nuclear always works. These are some of the typical choices. And sometimes when you've got a situation that's happened in Ukraine, Germany finds itself without electricity because it shut its nuclear power stations. And Japan had access to its power stations. So what I would bring is considered, evaluated life cycle type costing and engineering to these solutions so that we win and we win early. When you plan better, the project finishes sooner. It is less costly, it has less imperfections, and it works better. And some of the disruptions are not helping that cause. So that's what I would bring if you elect me, Gavin Palmer, as Mayor of Croydon, and I will be employing some great experts with that to make Croydon a much better, greener and healthier place and happier place to
We are all here because we care, and that's what unifies us. And we have to act. This is a climate crisis, and frankly, the government has not done enough, or is doing enough, or is actually putting plans forward. But that's why we must act. I want to make Croydon the cleanest, greenest borough there is across the whole of the UK. And no borough is making that commitment, but I want us to make sure that we drive the change so we become leaders within the UK of what we're doing. And the only way we're going to be doing that is doing it together and driving through policies, making sustainable policies, energy, and using the new technology available out there. It's so important. We can have a cleaner and greener Croydon, but we need to make sure that the council has the right leadership that is going to push that agenda forward, because unfortunately, the corrupt council that we have, the money has been embezzled, God knows where it's gone, but the point is it's not going to the right places. So that's why we need to make sure we're putting money into trees, we're putting money into recycling for waste. So there's so many initiatives that we can do, and I want to commit to you today, as your next mayor, I'm going to drive forward all of these policies and make sure Croydon is greener, cleaner, and environmentally friendly.
As I mentioned at the start, Croydon is facing multiple crises simultaneously. And if we have a joined up council, we can mean that solving one, the housing crisis, can mean that we help solve the climate crisis simultaneously. And that's what we need. We need a joined up approach in order to do that. They don't have to be trade-offs against each other. We already have that clear vision that I talked about. It's in the climate action report that was generated. It is there. That is what good looks like. And we need to make sure we communicate that out to the people of Croydon. But we also need to carry them with us. And that means making sure that we don't just have fait accomplis delivered to people. This is how we will change. This is how it will happen. Those choices have got to be made at the local level, they've got to be made at the devolved level, and they've got to be funded. So that is my proposal for how we deliver this. We need transformational leadership. We need to be able to transmit that strong vision that's been created in the climate report into real action. And as I mentioned before, we need quick wins. We need people to see that what they're doing is making a difference, and making a difference to their lives and also in future generations.
Jason Perry is committed to a greener and cleaner Croydon and to meeting the climate change targets. But one of the themes of my addressing you today has been about being practical. And unfortunately, the council is in a dire position at the moment. It is a case that has gone bankrupt. It is the case there is a specialist company that has been brought in whose job is to investigate money laundering, corruption, and fraud. Until we get on top of what has happened and solve these extremely dire problems, it's going to be difficult to achieve, frankly, anything. So if you're voting for the right mayor and the right people, think about competence, think about who has the skills and who has the ability to deliver on the targets and the outcomes that you're looking for. The people who are running the council at the moment, have a look at the record. Thank you very much.
We've only had 2 hours to talk about the climate crisis, which is never enough. So many more things we could talk about. If you've not looked through the Croydon Climate Crisis Commission report, let's make sure I get that in the right order, definitely do so. But I would say that when we put it together, I was one of the commissioners on that, we said at the time that that wasn't everything. That was a starting point. And it's a year old now, it needs updating, it needs work, further work to be taken forward, and some things need to be done a lot quicker because we've had another year of waiting around for things to do. In terms of my background, I worked in the Department of Energy and Climate Change, particularly on the renewable energy front. I now work for two conservation and rewilding charities. I'm a member of the Green Party. This sort of stuff goes through me like a neighbouring stick of rock. And that's one of the key points I want to come back to in terms of your choice for mayor. You've heard a lot of promises here this evening. You've had a lot of ideas, some more practical than others. But you've got a question, whoever you're going to elect is going to be there for 4 years. We've also heard about broken promises, and unfortunately, when it comes to climate and the environment, our politics is littered with broken promises. So your question is, who can you trust for the next 4 years to make sure that the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, is front and centre of every policy decision? That's your gift.
Well, the creation of an elected mayor is something I support, and it is the constitutional change that we needed in Croydon. It's really important that if whatever you believe in, you've got to be able to manage to deliver. Referring back to my background, when I was the council leader here in the 1990s, we managed to deliver the tram scheme. When I was deputy mayor of City Hall, we managed to deliver the ultra-low emission zone and numerous major transport projects. And I've worked cross-party with other parties that scrutiny at City Hall to focus on things like how can we improve active transport. I do think that the climate change issue is something that we should look at every single thing that we do through the lens of how does this affect our environment. So it's not just those important practical programs that we've got to deliver, but it's also about how do we audit everything we do to make sure that the strategies do align and that we are actually walking our talk in every single thing that we do. It's really important that we get the basics right, that the mayor gets the basics right in running the council. It's important to stabilise the finances. It can be done. Things are getting better with the work that's going on under the new chief executive, and we need to continue that. Because apart from anything else, apart from the probity issues and the efficiency issues, in order to bid successfully for so many of the programs that we need, be it tree planting or be it insulation, we have to show that we can deliver and that we are efficient. And I'm totally committed to making sure that the young people in my family, my young neighbours, that the young people in Croydon have a good quality of life and good jobs for the future and can look forward to living in a healthy, green Croydon.
Chair, this is an important meeting because there are silent deaths that are taking place as a result of pollution and as a result of climate change. And I've come up with local solutions, and it's local, and it's only the council with local solutions. And I'm taking on the work of the Commission in terms of agriculture. It's not mentioned by others in terms of trying to have a more sustainable retail offer based around the railway station, introducing workplace parking levy, working with Gavin and with the GLA to make sure that that is possible. It pays to invest, really. I've chaired pension committee, which has since then been made 887 million pounds, and the council has been losing 193. And one of the ways to make money is by investing. Really. It's better returns. It's logical. It isn't just about the heart, it's about the brain and sensibility too. I want to give credit to the people who really did live in the trap. It was Peter Burness who did that, much against my opposition, so to say. But nevertheless, he showed the good judgment of getting that through. And I know it's not fashionable to like Ken Livingstone, but it's Ken Livingstone who delivered in terms of actually delivering and having the will and the determination. He did. He had the determination to get through the congestion charge when it was extremely unpopular. But it is that kind of leadership that you want in a mayor. Now, it's fair to say that Valerie is running away with this election. It's almost a done deal. But I want to be able to say to you, it is a done deal, Mr. Cartwright, echoing from the front there, because the reality is that the Conservatives are so unpopular nationally, there is really a challenge taking place. And in many ways, we're going to get a re-election of the Labour Council with all its failed governments by default. But I would like to remind you, as this is a job that Peter normally does, you have a first preference and a second preference. You must vote for the party, please use your second preference for that, and use your first preference to vote for the best candidate. Thank you very much.
So a massive thank you to all the candidates that decided to come here today for the climate hustings, and to the team here at Croydon Climate Action and the Croydon Green Network for holding this event. Most importantly, a massive thank you to you, the people of Croydon, for turning up and putting our prospective mayoral candidates to the test. Hopefully this hustings has inspired not only the prospective mayoral candidates, but everyone here to contribute to achieving the goal of making Croydon carbon neutral by 2030. Thank you very much. Just a quick mention before we go. Today is the 22nd of April, which does mark the 29th anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's death at the hands of some thugs. So do donate to the StephenLawrenceDay.org. Thank you very much.